Okay, good morning everyone. Happy Friday. Second last week of term. I hope everyone had a good afternoon yesterday. Um, Today is Eid, by the way. I forgot to mention yesterday, so Eid Mubarak to all of our Muslim friends, and if there are Muslim friends joining us this morning, thank you for doing that. Yeah, so what we'll do today, this is the Friday before a long weekend because of course Monday is BC Day, so there's no class on Monday. So what we'll do is we'll just have a short class today. We'll talk a little bit about what we talked about on yesterday, Thursday. I have a little article for you to read, which is pretty easy to read. A couple of pretty simple questions, and then maybe we'll call it there. Okay, so kind of a short, easy class today before the long weekend. Okay. Let's see who's here. KC is here. Good morning, KC. Jen is here. Good morning, Jenna. Karen's here. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Mashid. Krish is here. Good morning, Krish. Thika's here. Hello. Good evening to you. Jimmy's here. Good morning, Jimmy. And Banamir's here. Good morning, Banamir. Yeah. Okay. Let's get started. So yesterday we were talking about religious oppression. So again, we're looking at ways in which people of different religious faiths and people who are in minoritized groups in terms of religion, how they are disadvantaged and discriminated against in society. And again, we can see these in a number of different ways. Sometimes there's stereotypes or prejudices around people with certain religious beliefs. And sometimes we see that turning into discrimination, either on kind of a personal level or in terms of employment, or in larger ways too, in the way that society and government and law actually work. And again, religious oppression can occur in all kinds of different societies, even societies where religious freedom is a right, like in Canada, right? I did say in Canada that most people here are Christian, and so Christians are the dominant group in Canada. I said that the Christians kind of break down into Catholics and Protestants, but there's also a pretty significant percentage of Canadians who don't seem to be strongly religious at all. So there's atheists, people who don't really believe in any sort of higher power, people who are agnostic, who are kind of not sure, I guess, and people who are, I guess, don't think of themselves as religious or don't fall into an easy category. I guess that's 16%. But I guess you could say from the statistics, there's a chance that Canada is becoming slightly more religious as we accept more and more immigrants from different parts of the world. And so, currently there's only about 8% of Canadians identifying as Muslim or Hindu or Sikh or Jewish or Buddhists. But since most of the places that Canada's immigrants come from have those faiths, then that percentage is going to grow in the coming years. So that 8% is going to get larger, and probably that 55% of Christians is probably going to get smaller. But I guess that remains to be seen. I'm not really sure what will happen there. I said that currently in Canada, Christians are the dominant group. All other religions are in the minoritized group. But the religions that are kind of most vulnerable to prejudice and discrimination, I think, are the people who stand out more clearly. And so people who wear religious symbols. Good morning, Hossam, and hello to Ivan. Hello, Ivan. People who wear clear religious symbols, symbols of their faith, those are the people that stand out in society, and so I think they're more vulnerable to prejudice and discrimination. So again, here we have a Sikh police officer here. There's, I assume, a Muslim woman in the top left, and we have some Jewish guys here in the bottom left, and all of them are kind of easily identifiable to society because of the clothing they wear, which is religious in nature, right? So one of the challenges in Canada has always been um, to be united and to get everybody to agree on things, but also to do that in the context of diversity, right? Because we have a multicultural, multi-religious society, and we do want to keep that. We're not trying to, here in Canada, we're not trying to assimilate people usually, and we're trying to find a way that everybody can be on the same team, but still hold on to their traditional values and traditional culture, and religion, of course, is a part of that. All right. Yesterday, I talked about the idea that our practice of religious freedom is, I guess, predicated on this, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so I said that the UN created this after World War II, following the Holocaust. And it was drafted and all countries unanimously approved. But of course, not all countries follow it as well as they should, but it did serve as a blueprint for other countries around the world to develop their own human rights codes. And Canada is no exception to that. Canada has done that. So as of 1960, we had a Canadian Bill of Rights, which was a federal law that was passed. But of course, federal laws can be changed and overturned fairly easily. And so this Bill of Rights was good, like it protected the rights of Canadians, but because it wasn't in the Constitution, it wasn't really guaranteed in the same way. Sort of our gold standard for, sorry, I'm just going to jump ahead because that's too much. The sort of gold standard for rights and freedoms happened in 1982 when we brought our Constitution back from the UK. So we repatriated our Constitution, and in that Constitution we have our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So Canada's Constitution describes how the government works and how the government is organized and what powers the government has, but it also tells Canadians and everyone in Canada what their particular rights and freedoms are. And so I think I showed you this yesterday, which is kind of the simplified form. There's a long, boring version if you ever want to read it. But the idea here is that it's all of Canadians' rights and freedoms are written here in sort of clear, simple language, so that everybody knows, what their rights are, right? And as you can see, there are a number of different types of rights and freedoms here. There's sort of fundamental basic freedoms. There's mobility rights to move around in Canada and to enter and leave Canada. There's legal rights that you have. There are equality rights, which we'll talk about in a second. And there's some rights that extend to languages. So official languages of Canada are English and French, of course, and some language about how people who speak a minority language can have their children educated in that language. So there's a few things in this charter, but what we're interested in at the moment is this. So in the fundamental freedoms of the Charter of Rights, it says this. It says everyone has the following fundamental freedoms. So freedom of conscience and freedom of religion. So according to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you are free to make up your own mind about things, and you are free to your religion, right? So religion is spelled out right there. Freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press and other media communication. Freedom of peaceful assembly, so you can get together in large groups of people, except during COVID, but that's another thing. Yeah, and freedom of association. So people can, what these 4 points mean here, A, B, C, and D, at least for religion, is that people have the freedom to believe what they want, to practice the religion that they want to practice, and to get together with others and practice that religion as a group, right? And that's the peaceful assembly and the freedom of association. You can gather together with members of your faith community, and you can practice your religion without any issue. And the Constitution, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, guarantees that. Now, to read this article or to understand what I'm going to tell you, one part of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is this thing here, the notwithstanding clause. Okay? And so there's two things happening here. Notwithstanding is kind of a fancy way of saying, like, oh, never mind that, right? So the to say notwithstanding is kind of to disregard something that you maybe should be paying attention to, but you're disregarding it. And a clause is just a section of a contract, right? It's just a little blurb within a contract or within a law. So what is this thing? Well, it's part of the Constitution that says, and this may sound strange, but that governments, the federal government or the provincial government, can make a law that violates a charter right, so any of those rights and freedoms we just saw in the list, a government can make a law that violates one of those rights using the notwithstanding clause. Okay? So basically this is it's a bit of a cheat code, if you will, for the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the reason it's in there in the first place is that when Justin Trudeau's dad, Pierre Trudeau, was bringing the Constitution back to Canada, and when he was trying to get the Charter of Rights and Freedoms into the Constitution, he needed the agreement of all of the provinces. That's kind of how Canada works. Canada is a bit of a power-sharing balance between the federal government and the provincial governments. And so the provincial government saw the draft version of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and some provinces were worried that they wouldn't really be able to make any laws anymore because they would sort of lose all their power to do so with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so the only way that Pierre Trudeau could get that Charter of Rights and Freedoms into the Constitution was to add this notwithstanding clause. And again, it allows governments to make a law that actually violates people's charter rights and freedoms. Which I know sounds a little strange, and I think it is a little strange, but that seemed to be the compromise. It was the only way that Pierre Trudeau could get the Charter of Rights and Freedoms into the Constitution. Now, most of the time, Canadian governments don't use the notwithstanding clause because, as you might imagine, people don't like having their rights taken away. They don't like having laws that violate their charter rights. And so to do so, if you're a government that's going to pass a law that violates a charter right, you have to be ready for some angry people, right? There's going to be people protesting and yelling at you and sending you nasty letters and maybe not voting for you next time, which is not what you want. You want people to vote for you. So most governments have not used this clause very often because it's just kind of politically dangerous, right? People don't like to have their rights taken away. If you're going to do it, you should have a really good reason for it. And so most governments are very careful not to use it. So I don't think the federal government has ever used the notwithstanding clause. So all of the federal government laws follow the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Most provinces haven't either. I think Alberta and Saskatchewan have used it maybe once each or twice each. And then there's Quebec. So this could be a long story, but I'll keep it short. Um, Quebec uses the notwithstanding clause very frequently, and they do it in order to protect their French language and French culture. So, again, Canada started out as a multicultural country. The people who had power at the beginning were primarily the British and the French. And since that time, Canada has become much, much more English, right? So almost all of Canada is English except for the province of Quebec. And so Quebec has passed all kinds of laws that ensure that French is taught in schools, and ensure that signage is in French, and ensure that the language of business is French in Quebec. Even things on your here we go. Here's a candle, right? It's grapefruit and oleander, but because of Canadian law, it also has to be in French, right? And so the Quebec government has used the notwithstanding law a bunch of times in order to protect their language and culture, so they say. So most provinces have never used this notwithstanding clause. The federal government has never used it, but Quebec uses it quite often. Quebec uses it quite often. The other thing that we should remember here before we start reading is this idea of reasonable limits. Okay, so in the Charter, your rights and freedoms are guaranteed to reasonable limits. Okay, so your religion might be guaranteed, right? And you might be able to practice your religion, but if your religion were to hurt other people, if your religion were, if you believed in human sacrifice, I mean, that would be a limit, right? So there are fundamental freedoms that people can practice. There are fundamental freedoms that people can practice, and religion is one of those, but within a reasonable limit, right? So again, you can't, if your religion involves hurting other people, obviously you can't do that, right? If your religion involves human sacrifice, you can't do that either, right? So there are limits to these rights, and they're subject to the court interpreting them, and that's what they mean by reasonable. So if there was a challenge, if it went to court, the court would determine what things are reasonable and what things are not. Okay, so 3 things. So we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that guarantees people's right to practice their religion within reasonable limits, right? So again, if you're hurting other people or causing huge disruption in society, that's not reasonable. You're not allowed to do that. And the third part is we have this notwithstanding clause that allows governments to actually override the Charter. Again, it doesn't get used very often, except in the province of Quebec, where it gets used quite a bit. And okay, I will talk about this now too. If you feel that your rights have been violated by the government, again, in Canada, you can actually take the government to court. Okay, so the Constitution arranges the Canadian government in such a way that the legal system, the judicial system, is separate from the executive branch of the government. Okay, so in theory, Justin Trudeau cannot interfere with the judicial system at all. He cannot interfere with the courts. As Prime Minister, he gets to choose judges sometimes, but after he chooses them, that's it. They don't owe him anything. He can't fire them, and they will go ahead and do their job. So you can take the government to court if you feel that your charter rights have been violated, and you can win, and people do win. Um, Usually these things kind of go up through the courts, and so sometimes if there's a charter rights or human rights challenge in BC, sometimes the BC court will rule on it, but sometimes it'll make it all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. And so the Supreme Court of Canada is the highest court in Canada. There's no authority above it, and the Supreme Court has the authority to tell the government to do things. Okay, so if the government passes a law that violates people's rights, people can challenge it in court. It can go all the way up to the Supreme Court, and if the Supreme Court rules, they can tell the government to change the law. Okay, and they've done it in the past. They've said the law you've passed. There was a law on prostitution that was passed 5 or 7 years ago, and it was challenged, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said to the government, your law is unconstitutional. It violates people's charter rights. You have a year to change it. And so, again, the Supreme Court is powerful enough to tell the government what to do if they decide that people's rights have been violated. And again, that's a really important feature of a democracy, to have an independent judicial system that can make these decisions. And that's why, if you've been following American news at all, that's why it's so concerning when you see President Trump trying to pardon his allies and get his friends out of jail and things like that. That's really bad news. In a democracy, you do not want the executive branch, so the prime minister or the president, you do not want them interfering in the judicial system, because the judicial system is what holds everyone accountable and keeps everything fair. If the government is in charge of the legal system, you have no fairness, right? You can't take the government to court. You can't ensure that your rights are protected because you have no one to appeal to. And so that separation between the executive and the judiciary is really important. And again, that's the way Canada works for the most part, which is really good. That's the way the US works, but again, Trump has been violating norms, which is kind of his thing. And again, other countries aren't structured like that. Other countries aren't structured like that either. But for a democracy, it's important to have a separate judicial system, a separate court system. And maybe the last thing, this is just an added detail, but if you want to change the Constitution, which you can, you change it according to the 750 rule, which they came up with. And 750 rule is that if you want to make a change to the Constitution, you need the support of 7 provinces, okay? So 7 Canadian provinces have to sign on to it, and those 7 provinces have to represent 50% of the population. That's the 750. So you need 7 provinces to agree, and those 7 provinces have to compose 50% of Canada's population. And so the way Canada is kind of organized, you definitely need either Ontario or Quebec to sign on, because they're the most populous provinces. You can't get 50% of the population without one of them. So yeah, the Constitution can be changed. It's a bit of a process. We've tried to do it in the past. It hasn't worked. People haven't been able to agree on it, but there is a way to make changes. So yeah, okay. I think I'll leave that for now. Okay, here's what I want you to read, okay? So it is an article called "I Feel Like a Stranger Here Now." And I think I need to give you a little bit of background, and the background is in the wrong place. No? Where is the background? Yep. The background is here. So province of Quebec passed a ban on religious symbols on March 29th of 2019. And so what the law does, is it means that if you work for the province of Quebec, okay, so if you are a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, a police officer, just anyone working in a government office, typing on a computer and filing paperwork and things like that, anyone who works for the Quebec government cannot display symbols of their religion at work. Okay? And so this can be anything from, Christians wearing a little necklace with a crucifix, all the way to to Jewish people wearing kippah, people wearing turbans, people wearing hijab. All of these things are not allowed. And so, again, anyone working for the province as a police officer, teacher, lawyer, government official, doctor, nurse, bus driver, transit driver, all of these people are, says the Quebec government, they say they're in positions of authority, and so they cannot display evidence of their religion while they're working. And the law also asks that, or requires, that people's face is uncovered when they give or receive public services. And so, again, if you wear some sort of face covering that is connected, well, for any reason, connected to religion, but you must uncover your face to go into a government office and deal with them. Okay, so that's part of this law. Okay, so that's kind of the necessary background that I think you need in order to read this article. Okay, so the article itself is in Microsoft Teams, and so I put it into the files section the other day, and so if you go there, you'll see it, and it's called what is it called? It's called I Feel Like a Stranger Now is what it's called. And so it is, let me just check okay. So it's 9 pages, but most of it is pictures, so it's way less than that. So I think what I'd like to do is give you some time just to read this article and answer some of the questions. I've got 7 questions at the end for you to answer. And so maybe what I'll do is I'll give you 20 minutes to do that, and then when you come back, we will answer those questions, talk about things a little bit, and then that'll be it for class. Okay, so take 20 minutes, read the article, I Feel Like a Stranger Now. The questions are at the end of the article, and and I'll see you back here in 20 minutes, and then we'll talk about what we've read. Okay, it's an easy read, don't worry about it. So I'll see you very shortly. Okay. Okay, and we're back. So, a really short article there, and you can see that this is the article is the reaction from Muslims and Muslim women who live in Quebec and, of course, are affected by this religious symbols ban of religious symbols law that the Quebec government has passed. And so, what did you hear from these women? What were kind of the feelings they were expressing as a result of this law? What did they tell us? Okay, so let's see. So Casey, yeah. So we hear some disappointment from these women, right? They're disappointed at the passing of this law that affects them disproportionately, right? So they are more affected by this law than other people are. Many of them are worried, right? They're concerned about their career, they're concerned about their futures, they're concerned about their physical safety. Yeah, they're afraid as well, and they're angry, right? They're angry that the government has passed this law that seems to only affect a small group of already minoritized people, right? Let's see. Erica says they all feel that they are left out and they don't belong. Oh yeah, and they don't belong in society because they wear hijab or niqab, even though they've lived in Canada since they were born. Yeah. I think that's an important statement as well. For many sort of white Canadians sort of looking around at society, sometimes it's very easy to see someone different, right? To see someone who's non-white, and it's very easy to assume that they're from somewhere else, right? But we hear from a number of these women, from all of these women, I think, all of these women are Canadian born, and for some of these women, their parents are Canadian born as well, right? So these aren't, not that it would be okay if it was, because it's not okay either way, but these are not people from somewhere else, right? These are our people. These are Canadians that this law is negatively affecting, right? Again, not that it would be okay otherwise, but yeah, these are Canadians. These are people who were born in Canada. Sorry, I've got an eyelash in my eye. People who were born in Canada, people whose parents were born in Canada, and suddenly they feel like they don't belong, right? They suddenly feel like they've been pushed outside of the circle, right? What else do we hear? Yeah, they feel like they don't belong here anymore, which is awful, right? Because that's one of the things that Canada kind of advertises itself as, right? Is a place where it's an accepting place, a multicultural place, a place where people can feel safe, right? But with the passing of this law, these women don't feel any of that, right? They don't feel like there's a place for them. They don't feel safe. They don't feel protected. They feel they have limited rights. Well, yeah, their rights have been limited to some degree, right? And this law makes them feel their safety is in danger. Yeah. And Karen says they feel like second-class citizens, which I think I asked you about a little bit further on, but we'll get to that. And they feel endangered and scared due to assaults. Yeah. So that's a lot of feelings, right? That's a lot of feelings for the passing of a single law in a single province. But you can see how significantly these women are affected by what the Quebec government has done, right? Question for you: Why do you think hate crimes increased? Hate crimes toward Muslims, particularly. Why did it increase after the Quebec government passed this law? Because the law has nothing to do with hate crimes, right? The law doesn't say that that's okay to do, but somehow they increased anyway. So Casey says because the bill is a discrimination to Muslims, so it grants access to people who hate them. Yeah, so yeah, they're when governments do things like this, so when a government passes a discriminatory law, when a government official says something racist or something like that, it gives permission for other people to behave poorly. Okay, so other people who have racist views or Islamophobic views or such, when the government appears to legitimize their beliefs, when the government appears to support the things that they believe in, then suddenly they feel more bold. They feel like they're right. They feel like now they can express their racism or their sort of bigoted views because the government now agrees with them, right? And so you very often see this when the government either does something racist, says something racist, or passes a discriminatory law like this one. You'll see an increase in hate crimes and in sort of religiously or racially motivated assaults, because again, people are emboldened, right? They feel their views are legitimized, and so they can act out a little more, right? So laws like this can be dangerous even just for that reason, right? Because they sort of bring out negative behavior in some people. And Karen says because the people assaulting could use the excuse that they're breaking the law passed by the bill. Oh, I guess so. I hadn't thought of that, Karen, but that might be right as well. But I guess, I guess it almost goes back to the fact that if people might feel that, well, if the government is discriminating against people, then so can I, right? It must be okay. It must be right. But I think I think you're correct. You're correct, Karen. Very quickly here, whoops, here we go. Now, as the law is written, it says that you cannot wear any symbols of any religious symbols while you are working or receiving services from the government. It says you are not allowed to do that for any religion, so it applies equally to all religions, but it actually doesn't apply equally to all religions, does it? And why not? Who is more affected by a law like this? Who is disproportionately affected? Who is more commonly affected, or affected more than other people? Oh, sorry, Casey. So yeah, that's kind of what this article is about, right? Muslims, and because it prevents them from wearing religious garments, which is part of their culture and religion, yes, or they have to choose, right? For all of these women, the question, what's being put in front of them is choose your religion or your career, right? Or choose your religion or choose to stay in the province and the city in which you were born and your family lives and all your friends live, right? People are being asked to make this choice. They're being asked to assimilate, right? And particularly it's Muslim women who are being asked to assimilate here. Now, this goes back to the point I made earlier about some some religions are more visible in society than others, right? So Christians can walk down the street and you wouldn't really know because most Christians don't wear any symbols of their faith, right? Buddhists can walk down the street and they usually don't wear any symbols of their faith, and so you can't tell. But again, Muslim women, for instance, if they're wearing hijab or niqab or burqa, they're wearing symbols of their faith and they're very clearly visible to society. The same with Sikh men, right? Sikh men wear a turban, and so they're very easily visible in society. And so a law like this is going to disproportionately affect people who have religious symbols that are obvious to society, right? And so if you work for the Quebec government and you're very, very Christian, you're so super Christian, the law actually doesn't affect you because you probably don't wear any symbols of your faith, and so it doesn't matter. But if you're Muslim, for instance, suddenly it affects you. And so this is a tricky law, right? Because it seems like it affects everyone equally, right? The law says no religious symbols of any kind, but some people display religious symbols and some people don't, right? And the ones that display those symbols are going to be disproportionately affected, right? And so and in this case it's Muslim women. The next question I asked you here, I can't put the whole thing in the box. This is graduate student Bara Arar says, people who are not affected by the bill or people who do not identify with those affected don't understand the immediacy of these politics. So why is Ms. Arar saying that? And what's she referring to? I'll explain, Karen. Maybe I'll explain that in a little bit, okay? Or I'll try to explain it if I can. But what's Ms. Arar saying here? People who are not affected by the bill or people who do not identify with those affected don't understand the immediacy of these politics. Okay, so Casey says, people who are not Muslims or any other workers who does not wear religious garments are unaware of the negative effect this bill causes them. Yeah. And particularly think about the situation that some of these women are in, right? Some of these women are graduating from university. We'll talk about that one in a second too, Karen. People were graduating from university, and so they're going to try to find a job, but now they might have to, they might not be able to be hired as teachers. There's some people who are planning to enter university, but they're wondering where they can now study because they display religious symbols. We have some people who are established. There's the lawyer, Miss Farhat, I think. She's a lawyer with an established career in Montreal, but all of a sudden her rights are being limited. So there's women in all sorts of different stages of their lives and careers, and suddenly the plans that they've been making, the goals they have, the dreams they have, suddenly the door has been closed. And the door has been closed for no other reason than the fact that they're Muslim, right? So Erica says here, people who have privilege. That's good, Erica. That's really good. She refers to people who have privilege. So remember when we watched that documentary, the T Word, with the transgender people, and some of the transgender people in the documentary were talking about passing privilege, right? And so they said Shane, for instance, was the young trans man, and he said, I have passing privilege. I can walk down the street and everyone just sees me as a man. They don't know I'm a transgender person. They don't know I'm a trans man. They just think I'm a man and I walk down the street and nobody notices. Here it's the same thing, right? For with religious, you have passing privilege, right? So if you don't wear any religious symbols, nobody can really tell what your religion is. But as we mentioned, there are certain religious traditions that do wear symbols of their religion and are kind of required to, and in some cases choose to, but they don't have passing privilege, right? They cannot walk down the street and people don't know what religion they belong to. People do know, right? And so, yeah, people who, yeah, she's saying here what, oh, sorry, I didn't put it up there. People who are not affected by the bill or people who do not identify don't understand the immediacy. Yeah, and so people with privilege, people who are Christian or who aren't strongly religious one way or the other, or belong to a faith that doesn't wear any religious symbols, they're not affected. And keep in mind the stats I gave you before. 55% of Canadians are Christian, probably not affected. Another 30% aren't really religious at all, not affected, right? What does that put us at? 85%? And then some of the religions that we talked about that are in Canada don't express or don't wear any religious symbols either, like Buddhists or Hindus. And so you're looking at a very, very small percentage of people who are affected by this law, even though the way the law is written, it seems like everyone, right? It seems like everyone is equally affected, but it's not the way it is, right? So yeah, some people have privilege. That was a good catch. Oops. Let's see if I can copy this here. So this is the lawyer here, Ms. Farhat, and she says, or Farhat, sorry. Ms. Farhat says, I live in a democracy of public display that responds to populist majority opinion at the expense of visible minorities. So I know what she's saying, but I don't know what I expected you to say as an answer for this. So I don't know what you have. But what did you say? What did you say for this one? What did you say for this one? Sometimes I ask questions and I don't know what the answers are, but that's what you should do. You should ask questions that you don't know the answer to. Yeah, what do you think? So Ms. Farhat says she lives in a democracy, public display that responds to populist majority opinion at the expense of visible minorities. So Karen says it shows how discrimination is enrouted. Okay. Maybe entrenched is the word you're looking for, but that's okay too. It definitely does, right? So populism. We talked about this actually a little bit in comparative cultures when we talked about demagogues, right? When we were talking about Plato and Greek philosophy and demagogues. Demagogues and populists are very similar. And so populists here in this case are leaders who kind of just do what the people want, right? And so if people are if people are complaining against immigrate or complaining about immigration, for instance, then a populist will get up there and say, "You're right. Immigration is ruining this country," and they'll just kind of reflect what the people are already telling them, right? They'll just tell the people what they want to hear, whether they think it's right or wrong, or whether the people understand the issue or don't, or whether there's a better decision to be made. Populists try to make themselves popular by telling people what they want to hear, regardless of what might be right or wrong. And so here, the accusation, I think, is that there is some racism and religious intolerance in Quebec society, and the Quebec government is responding to it, right? And so rather than trying to educate people about religious diversity and racial diversity, they're simply going along with what other people say, right? With what popular opinion might be. Maybe she means the government only cares for majority groups. Yeah. And that's an important point too, because when you think about it, majorities don't need to be protected, right? Because majorities can vote their way into whatever, right? So, do Christians need to be protected in Canada? Well, not really, because they're in the majority, right? Christians can advocate for what they want and vote for what they want and get what they want, but they don't need protection. It's the people who are minorities, right? There's people who are small groups. Those are the ones that need extra protection because they can't vote themselves into a position of power, right? And so, again, if the populace just listens to the majority, usually the rights of the minorities are trampled on, right, and ignored. Yeah. Okay, last question, and I think this is just a restatement of what you said, Karen, when you said, what was Quebec thinking? I think this is the fancy way of asking that, but I guess that's what I'm asking, is what are they thinking? Like, how can they pass such a law? Because people have, we saw that in, excuse me, sorry. We saw that in an earlier slide, right? We said that the Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees people freedom of religion and freedom to express that religion, and freedom of religion and freedom of expression. And so if you wear hijab, if you wear a turban, that's an expression of your religion, and you are allowed to do both of those things in Canada, right? You are entitled to your religious beliefs. You're entitled to practice your religion within reasonable limits, but you're allowed to practice your religion, and you're allowed to express that religion, right? You're allowed to have celebrations and masses. You're allowed to pray. You're allowed to wear religious symbols. But how do we get a bill passed like this? Okay, so Karen says the government is equally discriminatory as the people. Yeah, and I think that's probably connected to the populism idea, right? Is that if the easiest way to popularity is to tell people what they want to hear, right? But again, is that the role of government? Is that the role of the leader, to tell people what they want to hear, or to tell them the truth and to make the decisions that are right? Populists don't care about that. Populists just care about what keeps them in power and what's good for them, right? What gets them elected next time. That's what they care about, right? Real leaders try to do the right thing. So yeah, this is a law that uses the notwithstanding clause, right? Because again, it does violate people's freedom of religion and freedom of expression, right? Two fundamental freedoms from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So Quebec has used the notwithstanding clause in order to override those freedoms and pass a law like this. So you can see, maybe let's give you one more bit of information here about what's going on here. Once upon a time in Quebec, I was actually born in Quebec, by the way. Once upon a time in Quebec, the state, so the government, and the church were pretty closely connected. Okay, so the Roman Catholic Church and the Quebec government were pretty closely connected, to the point where churches had a lot of involvement in running hospitals and schools, and so there was a lot of nuns working in hospitals. My parents, when my parents were young, they were actually taught by nuns. They were taught by religious figures. But then about in the 1960s, Quebec was trying to modernize its province and government. And so they separated the church and the state, okay? And so they kind of separated out. They put the church aside and said, okay, church, you just do your religious things over here. Governing the province, that's the job of the provincial government, and the church doesn't have any involvement. In the past, the church was intertwined with the state. And so in the 1960s, Quebec went through a process of secularization. Okay, so they moved religion out of the sphere of government, and government is now a non-religious entity. And so part of what's happening here is that the Quebec government is trying to claim that this is just part of the process, right? That they don't want any religion in government, therefore, don't show any religious symbols at work. But again, is that what's really happening, right? Is that what's really happening? Okay. I think that's all I'll say about that. I'm just gonna ask you, do you have any questions or things you're confused about, or concerns, or statements, or anything you'd like to say? Remember that next week is our last week of class. Remember that Monday's a holiday. Monday's BC Day, so there's no school on Monday. So we've got 4 days left, 4 classes left, believe it or not. Don't forget to work on your final paper on the weekend. I'm not sure what my weekend looks like, but if you have questions on the weekend and you want to email me or message me, I'll try to answer those as soon as I can. And yeah, I think if you don't have any questions, I think I'll end a little early. So Casey says no. Mashid says no. Erica says no. I'm sensing a pattern here, but what else? Anyone else want to say something? Or ask a question? Make a statement? Oh, there we go. Tika says no. Karen says no. Okay. John says no. Okay, I'll probably leave it there then. I'll probably leave it there. Again, I hope you have a really nice long weekend, 3 days off, and then just have 4 classes left next week. Work on your papers, ask me any questions if you have them, and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. Other than that, I think I'll let you go. So have a good weekend. I'll see you Tuesday. Bye.